Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. We are back with show number 31 of the MMA podcast that brings you fighting talk with a distinctly British flavour. My name is Simon Head. Joining me via the wonders of Skype is Mr. Chamatkar Sandhu. Sandhu, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm very well, Simon. It's the first big UFC event to be held in Europe this year, coming up at the end of this week. And I've already seen the UFC started to, really push the event. There's billboards all over the shop. There's posters on the underground. They've started to do the media rounds with the big outlets like BBC. So exciting times here in London, where the UFC comes home, so to speak.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good. We've got a sizable fight card coming our way from the O2. I know there have been a few complaints about a slight lack of star power at the top end of that card. But if you've been following the journey of some of these British fighters as they've made their way up through the domestic ranks and into the UFC, then there's an awful lot to be excited about as we build up to UFC Fight Night this coming weekend. But before we get onto that, Sandhu, let's take a quick look back at UFC Fight Night in Fortaleza, Brazil. This was a Fox Sports card. Now, normally you look at the Fox Sports UFC Fight Night cards, and sometimes they can be a little bit thin. This one was absolutely stacked. We had some superb fights on this card, great matchups, and the top three fights on the card, each fight delivered the business. Edson Barboza against Beneil Dariush. Just when we thought that Edson Barboza couldn't bring any more highlight reel material to his UFC career, he starches Beneil Dariush, who's been on some pretty tasty form of his own. Starches him with a perfect jumping knee. Amazing stuff, Sandhu. I know that you were burning the midnight oil on Saturday night watching this one. What was your immediate reaction once you saw that knee land flush on Dariush's chin? Incredible stuff.
Devastating, brutal, and beautiful. That's the way I'd sum it up. It was just a phenomenal technique, great power, and I don't know what it is, but it just seems lately we're getting blessed with lots of flying knee style knockouts. Michael Venom Page and Paul Daly come to mind, right off the bat. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Simon. Edson Barboza's highlight reel is just insane. It's fantastic and it's exciting. It's what fans really want to see. They want to see submissions, they want to see knockouts. And Edson Barboza provides plenty of knockouts. And even when he doesn't provide knockouts, he's involved in some very exciting fights, lots of action. And he's on a really good run now. This is a big win for him against Beneil Dariush, who's a real top contender in that lightweight division. But Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez, and Beneil Dariush, that's a pretty good run of victories for Edson Barboza. And it starts to beg the question, what do you do with him next? Because I think he's now starting to peak into the upper echelon of that division.
Yeah, it's worth noting, of course, Pettis and Melendez, both former world champions. Melendez in Strikeforce, Pettis, of course, in the UFC. And he won decisions against those two, but there's so much more to it than saying he won decisions against those two guys. He looked phenomenal in both fights, outstruck the pair of them, outworked the pair of them, and thoroughly deserved the victory on each occasion. You mentioned what does he do next? He goes back to his last defeat against Tony Ferguson, a fight that I was at in Las Vegas, and a phenomenal back and forth fight. And he wants to fight Tony Ferguson again. He said after the fight that a 5-round main event fight with Tony Ferguson would be crazy. It certainly would. It would be absolutely bananas, and I would love to see that fight again. I was cage side. It was in the... Crikey, what was it? It was at the Cosmopolitan. It was at the Chelsea in the Cosmopolitan, which is a tiny venue. Probably only held about 1,000 people, 1,200 people at most. And you really could hear every strike land, even from the very back row. And some of those shots that Barboza was landing on Ferguson that night was really something to behold. Something that will always stick with me is the sound of those leg kicks hitting Ferguson to the body in that fight. Ferguson got the win on that occasion, the Darce choke submission, overcame a fair bit of adversity to get there, but made it, got the win, and he's obviously gone on and done pretty well since. I'd love to see that fight again. Ferguson needs a fight. Barboza needs a fight. if the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight isn't going to happen, and if Nate Diaz isn't prepared to take that fight, I don't think that's I don't think that's too bad a backup fight. Do you agree with that, or would you see his future against maybe somebody else at the top of that lightweight division?
That's not bad. I just feel like with Tony Ferguson right now, he's put himself into a position where he's done no wrong, and if he's going to fight, it'll be for an interim title. And I think he wants a big money fight, and if it's not going to be Khabib, because they've tried to make that fight happen so many times. I liked your suggestion last week of Nate Diaz. Eddie Alvarez just got booked up, so he's out of the running. I'm looking at the rankings. Rafael dos Anjos is still positioned as a lightweight, but he'll be making a move to welterweight. So, I mean, just behind Barboza is one Michael Chiesa, who I don't believe is booked up right now, and he's looking for a fight. He was actually trying to get the Eddie Alvarez fight going, but that's not going to happen. So Edson Barboza, who's ranked a few places ahead of him right now, that might not be a bad shout, and it'll keep Edson busy. So again, with this lightweight title picture being what it is, I don't think he's going to be in that kind of title picture anytime soon. I don't think. And so this is an opportunity for him to keep busy, stay relevant, stay in that picture. I've just got a bit of a gut feeling though that for the remainder of this year, at the very least, he might be going towards that Yoel Romero, Damian Maia type of position, where he's got some amazing wins put together based on meritocracy alone. You could potentially argue with one more, big name value win on his resume, and you can put him straight into a title fight. But it's just not the way the cookie's crumbling at the moment for fighters in the UFC, as things currently stand under the new WME IMG era. So if I'm him, I'll just try and get a fight, and as long as that opponent is somewhere in and around the top 5, top 6, top 7, it keeps him busy, keeps him relevant. But hey, listen, if he can wrangle his way into a Tony Ferguson fight, then happy days.
Yeah, Tony Ferguson interim title fight, I think, might not be out of the question, just with the movements of some of the other guys at the top of that division. But we will wait and see what happens. I do agree with you, though, that Tony Ferguson's next fight should be for interim lightweight gold. So we'll see what happens with that one. Take yourself back to November 2014. And Mauricio Shogun, who a former Pride legend, a Brazilian mixed martial arts royalty, was staring unemployment in the face. He'd lost 4 out of his last 5 fights, including back-to-back knockouts to Dan Henderson and Ovin St. Preux. Since then, he has bounced back in really a quite remarkable manner. He went to decision to beat Antonio Rogério Nogueira in August 2015 at UFC 190. He then eked out a split decision, and eked out is the phrase there because I thought Anderson won this fight. Corey Anderson was the opponent, UFC 198, but Shogun got the nod down there in Curitiba, Brazil. A Brazilian getting a nod on the scorecards, who'd have thought it? And then, on Saturday night in Fortaleza, Brazil, he took on New Yorker Gian Villante and stopped him TKO in the 3rd and final round. And the crowd just went absolutely nuts. It was probably the biggest noise of the evening. Amazing stuff. I honestly thought that Shogun was finished about a year and a half ago. I couldn't see where he was going to go, and now here he is. He's picked up 3 in a row, and he's picked up the scalp of a solid prospect in that light heavyweight division with a stoppage win. That's impressive stuff from a guy who you'd expect to be on the downside of his career.
Absolutely, and I think it's good matchmaking from the UFC here, where you've got somebody who's in his mid-30s. He's not completely past it. There's still some interesting fights. I mean, you could put that same spin on Rashad Evans, for example, right now in the middleweight division. But they've slowly been able to build him back up again. And his last 3 fights have all been, actually his last 5 fights have all been in Brazil, but his last 3 in particular have come against, guys that have got name value for sure. But also there's not kind of like the pressure of him having to main event or co-main event a big massive card. His last 2 fights against Antonio Rogério Nogueira and Corey Anderson were part of a much bigger pay-per-view offering. So the pressure was a little bit off. So they started to build it back up again. And, he was in this kind of co-main event slot for the first time in a while. He got a good victory over Gian Vellante. It was literally old-fashioned, old-school Shogun, who are rolling back the years, a vintage performance of anyone that's been following his career for a long time. And actually, it's interesting that this is the third win in a row, the very first time he's been able to string 3 wins in a row together under the UFC banner, which is astonishing to kind of
remarkable.
Think it is. And he's in an interesting position now, because I think I think the UFC London main event could have massive ramifications with regards to a potential future showdown with Shogun. Because I think if Jimi Manuwa wins on Saturday night, and we can talk about this a little bit later on, I still think he'll need one more big victory for him to really be able to put out there that, hey, I deserve a title shot. And if you look at the light heavyweight division, you've got Shogun, who's number 6 in the rankings. After this win this past weekend, I'm sure they'll nudge him up to 5. And then you've got around the corner in Stockholm, you've got Gustafsson versus Glover Teixeira. Now, if Glover Teixeira beats Gustafsson, then I think Teixeira and Manuwa somewhere in the second half of the year makes a lot of sense. Gustafsson and Manuwa have fought before, they're much more training partners now than they used to be back then. Even though they did train back then before they fought the last time 3 years ago, they train together a lot more often now than they did back then. If they can avoid fighting each other, I think they will. And that's why I lean towards perhaps if Gustafsson wins in Stockholm against Teixeira, then I think you make the Manuwa Shogun fight. What are your thoughts on that side?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also, you look on the flip side of that Manuwa fight as well. Corey Anderson's tucked in there nicely at number 7 as well. So it really does keep that. It keeps that in the mix as well. So you've got Anderson, Hua, Teixeira, Gustafsson, Manuwa, and you can perm at least 2 decent fights out of that, with perhaps one of them going on to become the next number 1 contender. So there's plenty to look at there, and it's interesting. And a little note on Gian Vellante: if you are of the betting persuasion, and I know a few of you out there are, strongly consider putting some money on him winning his next fight, because you look at his career record, his last 5 fights, defeat, victory, defeat, victory, defeat. So he's alternating wins and losses over his last few fights, and he's due a win again. So keep an eye on Gian Vellante next time he steps into the octagon, because if form is anything to go by, he could well be taking home the winner's check at the end of that one. That was the co-main event of UFC Fight Night in Fortaleza. The main event was, I thought, something of a changing of the guard in the middleweight division. Young rising prospect Kelvin Gastelum, who, of course, we know all about his issues as a welterweight. I still think that is the weight class for him, but right now he looks so good at 185. Why try and fix it if it isn't broke? He took on the legend, the phenom, Vitor Belfort. Overcame a little bit of adversity early on in that fight. We saw a little bit of old school Vitor at points. Some of those powerful spinning heel kicks and some of those blistering striking exchanges that he likes to go for early on in fights. Gastelum did an excellent job of dealing with all that, and as so many people predicted, Gastelum turned the tables on Belfort before even the end of the first round and stopped him at the 3-minute 52 mark by TKO to stun silence inside the arena in Fortaleza. Great performance from Gastelum. The performance against Kennedy was impressive. This one, I think, just as much. And I think we're looking at a new rising contender now, Sandhu. What do you think?
He looks great at middleweight. He's not got any weight cutting issues. He looks thick and strong, and I think he's got a good style, abundance of energy. He's getting wins now over some real kind of veterans of that division. Guys that have got some serious name value. I mean, Tim Kennedy and Vitor Belfort, they don't get any bigger than that. And especially beating Belfort in Brazil, that's massive, that's huge. And the fact that he used his post-fight interview opportunity to try and set up a fight with Anderson Silva, I mean, he's saying all the right things, Simon. He's saying all the right things. He knows that he's only to put a run of wins together to slowly but surely put himself, in a potential, title picture within the space of the next, I suppose, year or so. And if you can get 2 or 3 more wins over some of the legends of that division, and then slowly but surely, try and creep up to that kind of like top 6, top 7, echelon of fighters in that division, then he'll be in a really good situation. But listen, it's not easy to go to Brazil and get a win in emphatic fashion like Kelvin Gastelum did over a legend like Vitor Belfort. And like you said, Simon, Vitor had his moments in that first round. First round, Vitor Belfort is still a very real thing, no matter what his age. But kudos to Gastelum to getting the job done.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see just how they play his career. Are they going to slow play him, or are they going to really catapult him straight up into there? Because you saw him against Belfort. From a size perspective, he's a small middleweight. And you look at him in the weigh-ins and you think, he should be able to make 170. He really should. But as a 185-pounder, he looks phenomenal. You can't argue with the performances. And his last 3 fights, obviously, the 2 most recent ones were at 185. But he's beaten Johnny Hendricks at UFC 200. He's beaten Tim Kennedy at UFC 206. And now he's beaten Vitor Belfort. The sky really is the limit for him, and I think it's a really interesting one. In many ways, I put him in a similar bracket to Cody Garbrandt, because he's this young rising star who they've gradually manoeuvred him into a position where he could challenge for a title, and when he got his chance, he took it. And I can see a similar situation potentially occurring with Kelvin Gastelum. He's another guy. He's got a sort of a clean-cut persona. He's a triple threat when it comes to the linguistic side of things. He was conducting interviews in English, Spanish, and Portuguese down there in Brazil, which is mightily impressive, especially for a guy who he's only 25 years of age as well. This is he's got a little bit of everything. He's an Ultimate Fighter winner, which is great for the brand, and he's been out and about as a guest fighter at points and has done a good job doing that as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with Kelvin Gastelum next. And he's the sort of person who you can put him in different markets and he'll do well. He is American. He will obviously do well in America. He's got that Mexican heritage as well. If they did a showdown in Mexico, I'm sure he would be well received down there too. So I think there's a big upside for Kelvin Gastelum, and it'd be really, really interesting to see who they look to put him against next. He wants Anderson Silva next. He's declared himself to be on some sort of veterans ass-whipping tour, and having done with Vitor Belfort. Not content with beating Vitor Belfort in Fortaleza, he now wants to put Anderson Silva away in Rio. Do you give him that fight?
I'm not sure. I mean, going by today's reports, it looks like Anderson Silva has got his eyes on potentially a Nick Diaz rematch in Rio. So, I mean, kudos to Kelvin, like I said, for calling his shot and trying to aim as high as he can. And it doesn't get any bigger in terms of legends than Anderson Silva. I just don't think it's going to happen, Si. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think the UFC, with Brazil being such an important market, if they can, carefully matchmake their big superstars, and Anderson Silva's finally just come off a win after quite some time.
Yeah.
You want to try and build that momentum, and that includes some careful matchmaking. So perhaps the Nick Diaz rematch might be a good thing for Anderson Silva. But again, kudos to Kelvin for trying to aim at that high. What's the saying? You aim for the moon, shoot for the stars, or what's the saying?
Shoot for the stars, you might get the moon, or something, or the other way around. I don't know.
There you go, something like that.
I'm useless at these motivations.
But apart from Kelvin, though, I think the more interesting situation coming out of the fight is what do you do with Vitor Belfort, and is this the end? And he's got 1 fight left on his contract. He called his shot in the post-fight press conference by saying that he'd like to go out fighting on that Rio card in June, UFC 212, headlined by Jose Aldo versus Max Holloway for the interim featherweight championship. Well, actually, no, it's the actual featherweight championship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Holloway's the interim, so it's the unification bout. So many interim titles, so I can't keep track. But but that would make a lot of sense. Vitor Belfort fighting in Rio, last fight in his contract, 3 straight losses. If you can try and leave the UFC on a high by getting a win in Brazil, that seems like a poetic way to go out.
I want to see him in there with Rashad. I think Rashad would. I think they're both at similar-ish stages in their careers. They're both in need of an opponent, and I think they're both in need of a fight that they would consider to be winnable, so they can feel like they're getting themselves back on track. Vitor obviously will want to go out on a high. He said he's going to retire after his next fight. Rashad Evans, I think, feels that he might have another few left in him, but he needs that win just to kickstart that. So Rashad versus Vitor, I think, would work quite nicely, and you could put that on anywhere.
I like it.
If Vitor wants it in Rio, then fine, do it in Rio. That would make a cracking main card fight in Rio de Janeiro. I think that would be a really interesting fight, and that would be the one that I would aim for, I think. But one thing about Vitor, and I know there's lots said about him and his changing body type during his career. I actually retweeted a picture this afternoon showing what he looked like in 2012 compared to what he looks like today.
Yeah, I saw it.
It's incredible. It really is incredible. But what can't be understated is just how much he's given to the sport. He's been in the sport for 20 years, and if you're in any job for 20 years, you've had a good shift. But this has got to be one of the toughest jobs in the world. Professional fighter, and he's gone through the whole growing process and developmental process of the sport of mixed martial arts at the highest level. He was in it when there were barely any rules. He was in it when the sport was struggling to get sanctioned across America. And now with the sport at its peak, he's still going. And granted, he looks like he's one fight away from hanging them up. His career is a remarkable one, and he's an absolute lock to get in that UFC Hall of Fame once he does decide to hang those gloves up. Wasn't his day on Saturday night though, and the plaudits deservedly go to Kelvin Gastelum, who won one of 4 Performance of the Night bonuses on the night. There was no fight of the night, interestingly. They gave the Performance of the Night bonuses to Kelvin Gastelum. Unsurprisingly, Edson Barboza picked one up. Michel Prazeres for his North-South choke win over Josh Berkman. And Paulo Enrique Costa, who ran through the Soldier Boy, Gareth McClellan, in the very first fight of the night. They all picked up a cool $50,000. That was UFC Fight Night in Fortaleza, Brazil. That was last weekend, but really, this show is all about what's going to happen this coming weekend. This is the Brit Pack after all, and we've got the UFC coming to our backyard, London, the O2 Arena, in London's Docklands, is going to play host to UFC Fight Night 107, as Jimi the Poster Boy Manuwa takes on Corey, whatever his nickname is this week, Anderson, in the main event. It's overtime, isn't it?
It is overtime.
After hammering him for Beast in 25-8, I actually prefer Beast in 25-8.
Beast in 25-8 was so bad it was good.
Yeah.
And then it just stuck.
I know. Overtime is just... It was like when Hector Lombard changed his nickname to Showweather and no one paid any notice. It was like, that's terrible, Hector. Just go back to being Lightning, or just don't use one. But yeah, Corey Overtime Anderson. You don't get paid for overtime in the UFC. So, interesting choice of nickname. But let's run through this fight card. We'll go bottom to top, work our way up to this main event. Lots and lots of British interest in this card. First off, no Brits in the first fight. Lena Landsberg, who for a minute it looked like we were going to lose her off the fight card altogether when Veronica Macedo, who was originally scheduled opponent, pulled out. She's now taking on Lucy Pudilova, who is from the Czech Republic and is making her UFC debut. That will kick things off on the very first fight of the night. That's a women's bantamweight contest. Then we go straight into it. A battle of Britain. Bradley Scott, Scott Askham, 185 pounds. Really interesting fight. It's kind of a crossroads fight for both guys. Bradley Scott, it feels like largely due to reasons out of his control. he's had long gaps between his fights, so it feels like we only see him every 18 months or so. But he's looking to find himself back in the winning column again against Scott Askham, who produced one of the knockouts of the year for me last year at the O2 when he kicked Chris Dempsey's head off his shoulders at the O2. So interesting one. He's coming off a loss. So's Bradley Scott, who lost to Krzysztof Jotko. Tough fight to pick, I think, because they're both at slightly different points in their careers, but they're both desperate to pick up victories.
Yeah, it's interesting how you described it as a crossroads fight for both of them. And Bradley Scott's just 27 years old. I feel like he's a bit way older than that, considering how long I think we've been covering him and how often we've been able to kind of interview him. And I think it maybe goes down with those long gaps in between fights that you mentioned there, Si. But these two guys, they're just a few months apart in age. You know, Scott's 27 and Askham's 28. They've both been alternating between wins and losses over the last 3 or 4 fights. They're not coming into this fight with any form of consistency or form whatsoever, and that's what makes it really difficult in regards to trying to pick a winner here. And it is a pick 'em, if you ask me. Just flip a coin. It's going to be interesting to see how they perform. One thing's for sure, they're both going to have passionate sets of the arena cheering them both on. And I do fear for the loser in this fight. I really do, especially the way WME IMG continues to trim the fat, so to speak, with the overall roster. But what I would say is whoever loses, and if that means that person does get cut, they probably couldn't be getting cut at a better time with regards to how healthy the state of European and UK MMA is right now with regards to potential opportunities. You've got the likes of BAMA, Cage Warriors, ACB, KSW. There's a lot of promotions out there at the moment that are really interested in British talent specifically. So, but let's not try to focus too much on the potential negative outcome. I'm just looking forward to a really passionate performance from both guys. They've both been there before. You know, they fought in the O2 before. They know what it's all about. They know what it feels like. And for Brits, it's a special occasion to be able to fight in the O2 arena in the capital in London. So I'm just looking forward to the fight, and may the best man win.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both guys have alternated wins and losses in their last 5 fights, and are coming into this one off the back of a loss. So somebody's going to walk away continuing that trend, having alternated their wins and losses. Someone's going to come away with back-to-back losses. Important fight for both men. An important fight for Ian Entwistle in the fight that follows that on the card at bantamweight. Ian was due to fight at UFC 204 in Manchester and suffered an illness during his weight cut and was unable to fight. He is back and he's taking on arguably the toughest bantamweight opponent he could fight from the UK in Brit Johns, who is undefeated. He's absolutely on cloud 9 right now after picking up a thrilling win on his UFC debut in Belfast against Kwan Ho Kwak. That was a really impressive performance from Brit Johns. As I say, he's taken on Entwistle. Entwistle's got a little bit to prove this weekend, just to get to the cage on Fight Night, because he didn't look good at media day when we spoke to him in Manchester. He looked very drawn, looked quite pale, and then later we discovered that he was taken ill, unable to make weight. His fight was off. I think it's really important for him that he wins the battle of the build-up and actually just gets to Fight Night. That'll be a victory in and of itself. And then Fight Night, obviously, it's all about being competitive on the night. We know he's dangerous with submissions. We know Johns is a high-paced fighter. I think this could be an entertaining one. But it's two guys at very different points in their career. We talked about Bradley Scott and Scott Askham, both kind of at the same point. These two couldn't be further apart. You've got Entwistle, who you feel like might be on his final go, against Brit Johns, who has just joined the UFC. He's riding a great win streak. He's a former Cage Warriors world champion, and he's got his first UFC win under his belt. Momentum is a lot in this sport, and Entwistle, I think, is up against it this weekend.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think Johns is on cloud nine right now, getting that first UFC win under his belt. Getting that first one is so important, and if you can do it in your debut, it just helps set the scene for the rest of your career. You're off to a good start, and we were both there in Belfast towards the back end of 2016. Great night for Brett Johns. He's had a great journey, and like you said, he's undefeated, so he doesn't know what it's like to taste a loss. Ian Entwistle, much like Bradley Scott and Scott Askham, alternating wins and losses in his last couple of fights. Appears that making the weight is a bit of a struggle, and so it's a shame where if you can just make the fight, make the scales, hit the weight, and make it a fight night. If that's already a struggle coming into fight week. That's not exactly going to, install anybody with any level of confidence. But yeah, I'm picking. I guess we're going to try and go through the fight card and try and pick as many, or make as many predictions as possible. So I'm definitely going to lean towards Brett Johns here, just like you said, Simon. He's got momentum like no man's business.
Yeah, I think the smart money will probably go on Brett Johns. Talking to Entwistle in Manchester, he gave me a really interesting interview at the time. The previous fight he had, he was just pursuing the leg lock submission over and over and over and over again. He ended up getting TKO'd as a result. And he told me that he fought like an idiot. I'm using his words, not mine. He said, I fought like an idiot, I fought like a moron, and I'm not going to do that again. I'm capable of doing other stuff. So I think, once he gets in there on fight night, I would expect to see a more well-rounded Ian Entwistle. Obviously, he's got those fight-ending submissions, and they are seriously dangerous. Yeah. But if that's all you have, it's too predictable. And I think he's wise to that now. So, really looking forward to seeing just what kind of approach he takes against someone like Brett Johns, who will be right in his face from the minute the bell goes. The next fight on the card at welterweight, for me, as soon as this fight card was complete, I'd put a little X next to this fight as a potential fight of the night candidate. Leon Rocky Edwards against Vicente Luque. This fight could go a whole number of different ways. Vicente Luque is a superb striker, comes out of the Black Zillions camp. Leon Edwards, we know he can bang. Our Seth Brzezinski, 7 seconds in Krakow. But what we also know is that Leon Edwards has got a hugely underrated ground game. A hugely underrated ground game. Vicente Luque is a BJJ brown belt. So we've got these two guys who both love to stand and strike, but they've both got some grappling chops if and when the need arises. And I thought that the performance from Leon Edwards against Albert Tumenov last time out really did show us the evolution of Rocky Edwards as a fighter. And I'm finding it fascinating to watch because he's homegrown. He's not someone who's gone overseas to hone his craft and spend months and thousands of pounds with an ATT or with a Black Zillions or with whoever. He's homegrown, and what we're seeing is a product of British-based training, and it's a real testament to how the sport's developed in this country. He looks like $1 million, but this is a tough fight because Vicente Luque is legit, and I'm really looking forward to this one. It's a tough one to pick as well.
It is, and I really loved the Tumenov win. We were both there in Manchester at UFC 204 cage side for that one. And to be fair to Tumenov at the time, a lot of people were picking him to win. And I think at the time he was the bookie's favourite to win that fight. And it was just great to see Leon Edwards, like you said, homegrown talent, really take it to Tumenov, who had a lot of momentum coming into that fight of his own and almost steal his thunder. And that was the fight that, for me, I thought to myself, right, you know what? Now Leon Edwards has really arrived on the world stage in the UFC. And this is a great follow-up fight for him. It's going to be a tough one, like you said, Simon, because this is another tough one to pick. It's funny because even though at the top end of the card, it doesn't have perhaps the sexiest names, the big, massive, draws. Scattered throughout this fight card are some really, really well matched up competitive fights, and this is another one. Like I said, Vincent Luque is phenomenal form at the moment. He's coming into this fight, winning the last 4, and since he's kind of left the Ultimate Fighter and came into the UFC proper, he hasn't lost. And actually, his last win against Bilal Muhammad via knockout in the very first round was very impressive. And that kind of made me really raise my eyebrows because I'd been following Bilal Muhammad very closely, and I was quite high on him. And then I wasn't too keen on Vincent Luque before that Bilal Muhammad fight, and that one just totally changed my perspective on looking at Vincent Luque in a completely different light. So this could go a lot of ways, like you said, Simon. I think we're dealing with two very comprehensive, well-rounded mixed martial artists, and I think this one could definitely be a fight of the night contender.
Yeah, you look at Luque's last 4 fights; they're all finishes. All finishes. 2 submissions back to back, followed by 2 knockouts. Not TKOs, knockouts. He starched Hector Urbina in Brasilia, got himself a bonus for that, and he put away Bilal Muhammad. And he did both of those in pretty quick order as well. Really, really impressed with him. Leon, he's on a 2-fight win streak himself. He's won 4 of his last 5. And I'm really looking forward to that fight. I think, if you're picking out the fights that you're particularly looking forward to, that is definitely one of them. I'm really looking forward to that. Tom Breeze is breaking new ground in the middleweight division. He's moving up. He's moved up from 170 to 185 pounds. He takes on Oluwale Bamgbose. And to start off with, this has got to be a good thing for Tom Breeze. I don't know how he made 170 pounds. I have no idea. He is a huge man. He's a huge man. And his story is an interesting one as well, Sandhu, because he was over there in Montreal at TriStar and developing his game over there. He's left TriStar now.
Yeah.
He's back home. He's back home and he's got all the training he wants back here. And from what I understand, talking to him and talking to his management, he seems a much happier guy now. And I think for whatever reason that move to Montreal just didn't work out for him personally. It works out for some. Like take Joe Duffy, who's on this card as well. We'll talk about him in a bit. He seems to be really doing well and benefiting from being out there in that environment. Tom Breeze, it just hasn't worked out for him, and he seems a much happier man. He's in a better place. I think he's going to be fighting at a more healthy weight class for him, and he's got himself a very interesting opponent because Oluwale Bamgbose is. He's lively, let's put it that way. He's full of energy, he's bouncing around all over the place. He lost his last fight, but the fight before that, he was spectacular, putting away Daniel Sarafian in a minute flat in Pittsburgh. He's a very interesting fighter. He's susceptible to getting hit, though, which might give Breeze all the invitation he needs. But this is Tom Breeze version 2.0, and I can't wait to see how different and how much better he looks compared to his welterweight days.
Yeah, I think not having to cut down to welterweight is going to be a massive boost for him in terms of just energy and stamina and just his general output. And I think this is a good fight for him. I'm picking him to win this one. I'm not being biased just because I'm a Brit, but I do feel like Oluwale Bamgbose, he's a specimen of a man, and but I do feel like he's very wild, and all of his wins have come by knockout. He's got 2 losses on his record, but all of his wins have all come by first round knockout. And he does carry a hell of a lot of muscle on his body. So I feel like if Breeze can be cool, calm, and collected, be technical, get past that first round, and just have some good head movement and some foot movement, and just avoid some of the wild punches and kicks that Bamgbose has been known to throw, I think he'll be all right. I think he'll take him into the latter stage of the second round, maybe the third round, and I fancy Breeze to get the win, probably by submission.
Yeah, I think this is the sort of fight that will hopefully show new layers to Tom Breeze's game. First off, he's going to have to deal with, on paper, what looks like is going to be a real striking onslaught in the first 3 or 4 minutes of the fight, and then that's when I think we'll see Breeze start to take over. That's the theory. But when you're fighting a man who goes by the fighting nickname of the Holy War Angel, I think you certainly need to be on your guard. And as you say, that record of his is ridiculous. 5 first-round knockouts on the spin during his days fighting for Ring of Combat. And he picked up the middleweight championship for them and defended it. And lost to Uriah Hall by first-round TKO. So he lives by the sword and dies by the sword a little bit. And in his most recent fight, Cesar Ferreira obviously took him into deep water and drowned him over 3 rounds and beat him by decision. So really looking forward to that one as well. You know, it's, as you said, not the sexiest fight on the card, but a fun fight on the card, as is the next one. And this is another one that I've marked out as a one to watch. Mark Diakiese versus Teemu Packalén. Both these guys have put in some very impressive performances inside the octagon. Diakiese, obviously, with the Brit pack. We've followed Diakiese. We've been high on this guy since his days in Bama, where he worked his way into championship level, picking up the, I think it was a Lonsdale championship then, and then moved his way up, got himself into the UFC, and has been a little bit rough around the edges at points, but he's looking good. He's looking good, and now he's got himself a fight against a fellow European prospect in Teemu Packalén. Another fun fight, Sandhu.
It is, and I think for Mark, again, it was, just to get to the UFC was massive for him, coming up the regional circuit here in the UK. And I think just get your wins, just get your first couple of wins in the UFC, just to kind of set the tone. He's still very, very young. He's still learning the game and developing and becoming better. And I think this is a really good matchup for his stage of the stage of his career that he's in right now. Teemu Packalén, he's come up on the European circuit. He's got a similar number of fights to Mark Diakiese, but I think Mark will thrive like he did in Manchester. He'll thrive on fighting at home, fighting in England, having that British support behind him. We'll probably see him once again have that blonde streak of hair, and he's notable. He's a marketable fighter. He's someone that you won't forget. And so to fight for the first time at the O2 Arena in London will be massive for him. And and I think he'll do well. I'll probably pick him to win, if not by a late stoppage. I'm sure he'll do enough to take it on the judges' scorecard.
Yeah, well, my understanding is, you mentioned his hair. I understand he's going for red this week.
Okay, all right.
So he's going for red. I don't know whether this is a Dan Hardy-inspired thing, because, he's got the monopoly on the red mohawk, but I hope he's got permission first. Doesn't want any gimmick infringement stuff going on. but I understand he's rocking the red because he likes wearing the red shorts and he's looking to coordinate. So there you go, a bit of a pre-fight news. This is what the Brit Pack likes to give you on a weekly basis. But taking on Teemu Packalén. Packalén looked really good in his last fight. Submitted Thibaut Gouti in just 24 seconds. Really, really impressive performance. That was at the O2 last year. So he's going to feel comfortable in his surroundings back at the O2 again. But I think Diakiese will have a clear advantage in the stand-up. And if he can keep Packalén off his back, I think he wins the fight. I think Packalén's grappling is enough to give him a few questions to answer on the mat. But I think if Diakiese fights smart, maybe doesn't look to push the pace quite too aggressively, then I can see him picking him apart and eventually stopping him middle of the fight. But I think that'll be a fun fight. And Mark Diakiese is always fun to watch anyway. He's the sort of guy that, if you know that there's a fight coming on and you see it's Mark Diakiese, you're not going to, that is not a fight to go and have a pee break or make yourself a cup of coffee, because you know something fun is likely to happen in that fight. The heavyweight fight between Daniel Omielanczuk and Timothy Johnson follows that. We have no British interest in this fight. What we do have are two heavyweights who have become regulars on the European UFC shows. Omielanczuk is very much a regular on the European scene, and Timothy Johnson is beginning to become one as well. He fought in Zagreb against Marcin Tybura and beat him deservedly by decision. He then fought Alexander Volkov and lost by split in Belfast. I thought that Timothy Johnson won that fight. I remember watching that fight at the time, and I thought Johnson did enough to win the fight. He's solid, he's unspectacular, but he'll just stand there and he'll trade with you all day long. Omielanczuk is a big, experienced guy with heavy hands. He's got kind of a half and half fight record. He's got, of his 11 wins, he's got 5 knockouts, 5 submissions. So there's no obvious sort of waiting in terms of you'd rather take him to the mat or you'd rather stand and bang with him. But he's one of those. He's one of those where it's going to be interesting to see just where we go in this fight. He's a dangerous heavyweight fight. Neither one of these guys are going to challenge for a championship belt anytime soon. Let's be honest. Sorry, it's 5-4, 5-4 for Timothy Johnson, knockouts and submissions. So interesting to see how this fight goes. Have you got any leaning in this fight at all?
I honestly don't care one way or another about this fight, Simon.
I was trying to big it up, and then.
I know, and I'm the kind of I don't know,
the voice of reason.
The voice of reason to say, look, it's another fight on the card. It's a heavyweight fight, and I'm hoping it goes the way most heavyweight fights go, which is an early knockout, or, and this is what I fear, it could go the way of a long 15-minute, drawn-out, sloppy grapple fest where it's not really that entertaining. And don't get me wrong, I love my grappling as long as it's something that's progressive, moving forward, aggressive, and you're aiming to get some ground and pound in, or maybe get a submission. And hey, listen, maybe these guys will do something that will just wow all of us and get a knockout of the night or something spectacular happens. But right now, my feelings are very, very low coming into this fight. So why don't we just move on to the next one, Si?
Yeah, Omilanchuk, very quickly, he's had 19 wins, 3 KOs, 9 submissions, 7 decisions. He doesn't mind going the distance. Timothy Johnson, 10 fights, 5 knockouts, 4 submissions. He's only gone the distance once. So we want to hope that Timothy Johnson continues his run of avoiding the judges' scorecards, with the exception of his last fight, and carries on with what he normally does, which is gets it done inside the distance. Now, that fight might be your pee break fight. I don't know. That's for you to decide. But the next fight, I would suggest you definitely want to watch. Light heavyweight contest, British interest, and a backstory that you need to know. Darren Stewart is taking on Francimar Barroso at 205 pounds. This is a rematch of Darren Stewart's UFC debut, a fight that Darren Stewart won by technical knockout, and won clearly by technical knockout. It was then overturned by the Brazilian Commission to a no contest. The reason for that was, during the fight, Stewart punched Barroso in the eye. It's allowed, it happens. Barroso claimed an eye poke. The referee told them to fight on. They fought on. Darren Stewart stopped him with strikes a matter of seconds later. We're now back in there. They're having a rematch. Stewart, I spoke to him after the decision got overturned. To say that he was pissed would be an understatement. He was livid. I had to seriously edit his quotes before they could be published. Let's put it like that. He wasn't happy, and I don't blame him, to be honest. It seemed like a very, very controversial decision to overturn that decision. So what they basically decided was, we're going to do this fight again. Stewart actually wants to campaign at 185 pounds, Sandhu, but this fight is just dealing with some unfinished business, and then he can move on. But you can expect a very, very fired up Darren Stewart, who has got some seriously heavy hands. So I'm looking forward to watching this one, because I think we're going to see a man going out there clearly trying to prove a point and looking to get just as quick a finish second time round.
Yeah, and it's another good story. Darren Stewart, another Brit who's made his way up on the regional circuit here. I remember covering one of his very early fights, Cage Warriors, way back in the day, back in 2014. And this no contest, fine, it's a no contest, but Darren Stewart hasn't suffered a loss yet in his professional career. And I think everything this is a nice little story. You fought a Brazilian in Brazil, gets turned into a no contest, and now it's the rematch. They're going to do it again, brother, and they're going to do it in London. They're going to do it in Darren Stewart's backyard. So, 37-year-old Barroso against a young prospect in Darren Stewart, the dentist. And I fancy Darren to get the job done. I think there'll be lots of passion coming through his performance. I think it'll be a fairly one-sided performance, to be fair. I think Darren Stewart's going to get it done fairly easily against Francie Barbarossa. That's just my humble opinion.
You heard it here first, Brit Pat listeners. Chimatkar Sandhu is predicting a drilling from the dentist. Coming up next is the top build prelim fight on the card. Joseph Duffy against Reza Mad Dog Madadi. Both these guys are big favourites of us on the Brit Pack for completely different reasons. One of them is one of the nicest, calmest, most level-headed men you can ever possibly wish to meet. And the other guy is a crazy man. And he's also lovely as well, but he is a crazy man. And those two are going to go head-to-head in a clash of styles and a clash of personalities in the featured preliminary bout in London. Where do we start with this one, Sandhu? I think this, for a start, the weigh-in will be interesting because Reza Madadi always brings a strong weigh-in game. Joe Duffy looks like he couldn't really give a stuff when he's weighing in. He's there, he's weighing in, it's normal. Reza Madadi turns into something sort of terrifying on a weighing day. So, how are you looking forward to this one? There's lots to pick over with this one, I think.
I think this is one of the most fascinating fights on the entire card, actually. From Reza Madadi's point of view, he's always Mr. Entertainment. And obviously had his stint in prison, and since he came back, he's 1-1. Lost against Norman Park, and then got a win over Jan Cabral. And he's 38, Simon. I don't know how many more years he's got left in him, but I just got a gut feeling that if he wants to sustain his UFC career, he's going to need a win. And although, like you said, Simon, he is super entertaining, great interview, always brings the fireworks at the weigh-ins, has one of the most entertaining face-offs ever. Always good for to get a picture or to get the video, because once that goes out, it just gets your blood pumping for the actual fight. So he always brings the heat, but he needs to win. That's the bottom line. He needs to string a few wins together. Now, what's very interesting about this fight is Joseph Duffy is fighting out his contract. This is the last fight on his current UFC contract. The UFC did make him an offer a while back to re-sign. He declined, wasn't happy with the offer, and he's decided to fight out his contract and to test the free agency market. So, and to go into the free agency market, you want to try and do it coming off a win, because I think that helps you with just being able to kind of negotiate and barter. Your stock is obviously a little bit higher. So lots riding for one Joseph Duffy. So it'll be. I'm really excited about the fight for so many different elements. The Mad Dog element of Reza Madadi, and then the contractual situation of Joseph Duffy and what he does post fight as well. So fascinating by the fight.
Yeah, they both need a win for sort of similar reasons, but slightly different reasons. Madadi wants to continue his career in the UFC, and Joseph Duffy wants to secure his next contract with whoever or whichever promotion that ends up being, whether that be the UFC, whether that be Bellator or elsewhere. But he, you're dead right. He needs to come off with a big win. He put up a very impressive victory last time round against Mitch Clark. Quick finish. Rocked him with a punch, took his back, finished him. 25 seconds, start the car. Easy. And Reza Madadi, it took him a little longer to get his most recent victory. A fight that he really had to work hard for, but he got the win, and boy did he need it. And looking forward to seeing which person is gonna progress and move forward after that one. This moves us on to our main card. 4 fights on the main card. Why are there only 4 fights on the main card, I hear you ask? That is because they want it on TV. And the main card is the televised part of the card here in the UK. Everybody else gets it exclusively live on UFC Fight Pass. Here in the UK, the top 4 fights will also be live on BT Sport 2, I believe. Arnold Allen versus Makwan Amirkhani. this is a fight that we knew would be on this card almost from the minute the event was announced. It might even have been the first fight that I heard about. And at 145 pounds, you will go very far to find two more exciting prospects from this part of the world at that weight class than Arnold Allen and Makwan Amirkhani. It's really interesting that they're being matched up against each other at this point in their careers. And one of them, I think, is going to be propelled towards a ranked opponent in their next fight. But either one of these guys, I think, could really do some damage as they start to move up the rankings. One of them is going to come away with a defeat this weekend. It's a tough ask for both guys. Arnold Allen, Makwan Amirkhani. What do you think, Sandhu? We know both these guys pretty well. How do we think this is going to shake out?
I really don't know, and that's what I love about this fight. This, for me, is the fight of the entire card. This is the fight I'm looking forward to most. You've got Arnold Allen here. Triple A, almighty Arnold Allen. And you mentioned earlier on, Simon, that Tom Breeze had gone out to Montreal to the TriStar gym, and it didn't work out for him. But it's worked out for Arnold Allen. He's out there. Joanne Calderwood's out there. Joseph Duffy's been out there. That is his home gym. He actually, I think I just saw a social media update where he just arrived a couple of days ago back to England. He is definitely one of the up-and-coming rising stars of the UK MMA scene, even though technically he's now training out of Canada. He's someone who's got a lot of upside. You know, he's still only 23 years old, and you know, it's gone all right for him in the UFC so far. I think that his last performance against Yeltsin Meza wasn't one for the highlight reel whatsoever, and I think, you know, he's someone that openly admitted that he thought he'd do better than what he actually did. And on the other side of the card, you've got Makwan Amirkhani, someone who's also changed up his training camp, left the All-Stars gym in Stockholm, Sweden, a gym that he called home for quite some time. And since he last fought, and that was against Mike Wilkinson, Jesus Christ, Simon, it's been over a year since he last fought. And I've caught up with him intermittently. He's had a few injuries and a few bits and pieces, but he's also changed up his camp. He's now training in the world-famous SBG camp in Dublin, Ireland, alongside the likes of Conor McGregor and Artem Lobov, and training under world-famous head coach John Kavanagh. This is going to be the first time that Amir Amirkhani is going to be performing and fighting since moving to the SBG camp. So, again, another European prospect, you know, a little bit more versed in the pro scene versus Arnold Allen. Makwani's 28 years old. He's been around for a while now. But I do feel that there's slightly more pressure on Makwani, just given the stage of his career. I think he's been out for a year now, and you've really started you got to push on now. Now he's been in the UFC, he's got 3 wins, fantastic. But what's the ceiling? Let's see you kick on, push on. If he's able to beat Allen, then I want to see him really get a top 15 ranked opponent and see how far he can go. But going to be a very tough fight. Flip a coin. I don't know which way it's going to go, and that's why it's so exciting.
Totally agree. I think both guys will be coming into this with a certain amount of pressure from within, really. You look at Arnold Allen, he's had 2 fights in the UFC. The first one, he stepped in at relatively short notice to take on Alan Omer. Had to overcome some adversity in that fight before eventually getting the guillotine choke submission finish in the 3rd round. Yeltsin Meza, as you said before, wasn't his best day at the office. We haven't seen the best of Arnold Allen under the UFC banner yet. Could this be the time for him to produce that on Saturday night? Then you've got Makwan Amirkhani, who he's a very entertaining fighter to talk to outside of the cage. He announced himself in the UFC in about as spectacular a way as you could possibly imagine, charging across the cage and hitting Andy Ogle with a flying knee and finishing him in 8 seconds in Stockholm. He then finished Maceo Fullen in Berlin in the 1st round before grinding out Mike Wilkinson in dominant fashion over 3 rounds last year at the O2. The question for Makwan Amirkhani is, can you finish another top prospect and propel yourself? For Allen, it's, can you get that landmark finish inside the UFC? Fascinated to see what happens in that fight. Also fascinated for slightly different reasons to see what happens in the bantamweight clash on the main card. Brad One Punch Pickett, beloved of this particular parish, is hanging up his gloves after this fight. It's the end of a long road for the Londoner. He was due to face Henry Briones. It was the third attempt to make a fight with Henry Briones, and the third time that Henry Briones has pulled out of the fight. They needed a fight, and with a week to go, Marlon Chito Vera accepted the call. I assume he's in England now. If he isn't, he's probably in the air on the way over. So he is going to step in and take on Brad Pickett for the final fight of One Punch's remarkable mixed martial arts career. He's on a tough run of results right now, Brad. I think he's lost 5 out of his last 6, and the one that he won was a very, very, very close split decision against Francisco Rivera in London last February. He's taken on Chito Vera, who was beaten in that same event by was it Manchester? It might have been Manchester, by Davy Grant. The question now is, can Pickett round off his career with the win that he so dearly wants in front of his hometown? I arguably could have hung his gloves up in the octagon in London last year. And I remember we spoke about it, Sandhu. Since then, he's had 2 fights and he's lost them both. He wants to go out on a win. He needs to go out on a win, and I think the crowd will take the roof off the O2 if he gets it.
Yeah, it's a tough one, Si, because we both agreed that a year ago at the O2, with Bisping and Anderson Silva headlining, there was a massive spotlight on that card. And for Brad Pickett to get a win, and it'd been a while since he won in the octagon, that was the perfect moment to go out on a high, to get a win in front of the old faithful, the London crowd. But it's always a double-edged sword. You coming off a bunch of losses, you finally get your hand raised in victory, and all of a sudden you think you've got it, and you can go a few more fights, and you've got one more run left in you. And it hasn't worked out for Brad Pickett over the course of the last year. Lost against Yuri Alcantara, lost against Uriah Faber, which was eventually his retirement fight. And Faber is kind of poetic that Faber beat Pickett in his backyard, in his hometown, and he went on a high and rode off into the sunset in retirement. Now, having said that, Brad Pickett has got an opportunity here to fight Chito Vera on short notice. Brad Pickett's the one coming in with a full camp. Touch wood, nothing goes wrong on the scales on Friday morning. No one eats any sushi. No, there's been so much bad luck has been happening with bantamweights over the course of the last kind of 6 months or so. So fingers crossed the fight goes ahead, because this is a time and this is the place. It's in London. It's at the O2 Arena. Brad Pickett, for me, and maybe we can talk about this more on next week's episode, where we can reflect a little bit more on how things went and the results. Brad Pickett is still going to be known for me as someone that was a fan favorite from the UK, and will definitely still be known as someone that is on that short list, that very short list of fighters that have beaten Demetrius Johnson, arguably the pound for pound best fighter on the planet right now. So he's got that little feather in his cap, but that's all something for us to romanticize about after the fact. I think the best thing he can do is just try not to let the emotions of the occasion get to him, because he's put it out there. This is a retirement fight, right? So I think it's just important for him to stick to his game plan, do what he does best, don't get caught, get the win, and then enjoy the moment.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Do you know he's not had back-to-back wins since 2012? That's how checkered a career he's had since then. He's a guy, he always says yes when the phone rings, and he's some of the names he's been in there with, Eddie Wineland, Michael McDonald, Ian McCall, Thomas Almeida, Yuri Alcantara, Uriah Faber. these are all people he's been in with, and unfortunately he's come out on the wrong side. But he's also picked up an awful lot of respect, an awful lot of post-fight bonuses, and an awful lot of fans. And I think it would almost be poetic justice for him to go out on a winning note on Saturday night. We're not supposed to be biased as journalists, but as a Brit, it would be nice to see Brad go out on a winning note, put his gloves down in the octagon in his hometown. You know, it's not often you get that opportunity to do that. So I think for everything he's given to the sport and for everything that he's done for the sort of the Zuffa era of the sport, fighting in the WEC, then going on and representing the UK with class throughout his career. You know, you never read anything negative about Brad Pickett. You know, you never hear an interview with him and think of him in a negative light. You always, you know, he's a classy guy. He's a fun bloke to chat to. He's a good ambassador for the sport. And I'm pleased that this is going to be his final fight in his hometown. Fingers crossed he goes away with a win. That is not the co-main event, however. That's the second fight on the main card. Co-main event, no British interest in this, but we have one hell of a fight at 170 pounds. Gunnar Nelson against Alan Jouban. This is a proper fight at 170 pounds. Gunnar Nelson, we know all about him on this side of the pond. He's had a lot of fights in Europe. He's had quite a few fights in England and Ireland. Trains out of SBG. His last win was against Albert Tumenov. Impressive submission that won him a Performance of the Night bonus. He went the distance with Damian Maia. How many people can say that? And he spent the distance on the mat with Damian Maia and survived. Which, granted, Maia's jiu-jitsu was at a different level to Nelson's, but Nelson was good enough to go the distance, which I think is a feather in any fighter's cap. If you find yourself with Damian Maia on your back for 3 rounds, if you can get to the finish, you've earned yourself a stiff drink. So, and he's been through. He's beaten some good guys. You know, George Santiago, Omari Akhmedov, Zach Cummins. These are all solid competitors at UFC level, and he's beaten Tumenov last time out. He takes on Jouban, who is coming off. Well, he's on a 3-fight win streak. Beat Mike Perry in a cracking fight in Sacramento. Really exciting fight. Another one that we put a little mark next to and say, make sure you're watching this one because this one could be a cracker. Clash of styles as well, Sandhu.
Absolutely. I think Alan Jouban is finally starting to put it together, and Gunnar Nelson is also starting to put it together. But and although, you know, with all due respect, they're MMA fighters, this is as close to a grappler versus striker matchup as you're likely to get at this level. I think if Alan Jouban can keep the fight on their feet and standing, then I definitely favour him. I'm not too sure if I favour him to knock out Gunnar Nelson, because Nelson's never been knocked out, and to my knowledge, I don't even think he's been knocked down. But I could be wrong. But he's definitely not been knocked out before. But I can see Jouban, being aggressive, staying on the outside, ducking and moving. Don't get into the pocket or any situation against the cage where perhaps Nelson can take you down. And on the flip side, Nelson is looking to do exactly that, is try and get the fight to the ground where he is, like you said, he's not Damian Maia, but he's the next best thing. And that's pretty damn good. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of strategy and style comes out on top. But when it comes to meritocracy and two guys who aren't too far away from, that top 7, that top 8, that top 9 list of fighters in the welterweight division, I think the winner can definitely take advantage, move on, and maybe get a top 5 opponent if things go their way after this fight.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. It's going to be all about who can dictate the location of the fight, if that makes sense. Yeah. People talk about range, people talk about pace. This is going to be all about where the fight actually takes place. Is it going to take place in the stand-up? is it going to take place on the mat? If it takes place on the mat, there's probably only one winner. If it takes place in the stand-up, we've got ourselves a contest, because Gunnar Nelson is no mean striker himself. He's got a bit of the old Lyoto Machida striking thing going on, and he's got the ability. I mean, he dropped Albert Tumenov in that fight, and Albert Tumenov is obviously, a well-renowned striker, and he dropped him before he submitted him. So he's got good striking, But Jouban's wheelhouse is obviously standing and fighting in the striking realm rather than on the mat. So interesting to see whether Gunnar Nelson looks to pursue the takedown early. One of the big criticisms of Nelson is that he doesn't fight like someone who knows he's on a time limit. I've always said that if you're fighting at welterweight, and there's no time limit, Gunnar Nelson will eventually find a way to beat you. And the fights that he's lost have tended to be fights, with the possible exception of Maia, have tended to be fights where time ran out on him rather than him being beat. If that makes sense. The Rick Story fight is the one that comes to mind. He just hadn't worked out what he needed to do in time to beat Rick Story. And he ran out of time. And I think this fight, we need him to be super aggressive like he was against Tumenov. And if he is, we've got ourselves an absolute banger of a co-main event. But speaking of bangers, the main event, Corey Anderson taking on Jimmy the Poster Boy Manuwa. Jimi Manuwa is coming off the best win of his mixed martial arts career, without doubt. I've spoken to him and I've spoken to other people about Jimmy's career as well. And the thing that has always stood out to me is that I've watched him go through the domestic ranks, and I've probably seen more of him than any other fighter in terms of live appearances. And he destroys people. He absolutely takes people apart. But he hadn't had that highlight reel finish in the UFC. And it always felt like, if only he gets that, if he could get that, people would wake up to just how good this guy could be. And he was always pretty cool about it. He was like, it'll come eventually, don't worry, it'll come eventually. Well, it came at UFC 204 in Manchester against Ovin St. Preux, a guy who was expected to beat him, if you looked at the odds before the fight. And he stopped OSP from taking him down. That's the work at All Stars, really taking his defensive wrestling to a completely new level. And that allowed him to fight from where he is at his best, in his standing kickboxing range. And he absolutely starched OSP right in front of Dana White, and picked himself up a $50,000 bonus into the bargain as well. Now he's got himself Corey Anderson, another tricky opponent, a guy who is going to want very little of his stand-up, I would imagine. I think we're going to see a wrestling-heavy attack from Anderson. If Manuwa stops Anderson from taking him down, then we could well see another big win for Jimi Manuwa. If Manuwa has to spend 5 rounds fighting off his back, it might be a tricky one. But it's a really close one. We've got a wrestling specialist against a striking specialist, and it's going to be all about who can impose their style on the other. Fascinating contest.
It really is. The UFC haven't gone with this particular narrative, which is fine. But I maintain the story coming into this weekend's main event is Jimi Manuwa being able to go back to 2013 when he lost in the main event in the O2 Arena against his now full-time training partner, Alexander Gustafsson. A night where he would have had friends and family, lots of his hardcore, passionate London fans in attendance, and he lost. And he lost by knockout in devastating fashion. That would have been a good night for Jimmy. Probably bruised his ego and bruised his pride. And I think that's the storyline and the angle here, is to come back a few years later and actually get his hand raised in victory in the O2 Arena. The thing is, I think for a lot of our perhaps international listeners, they don't understand what it means for fighters, British fighters specifically, not just to fight in England, but to fight in the capital and fight in the O2 Arena. We're both old enough to remember when the O2 Arena was the Millennium Dome, It was one of the special attractions and special buildings that were made in the build up to the year 2000, and subsequently it was bought out by O2 and turned into an all-purpose arena. And over the course of the last 15 years or so, it's now really started to kind of create a lot of amazing memories, host a lot of special events, and it's got a bit of an aura about him, and it's got some kind of prestige about being able to fight and compete in any sport in that particular arena. So I think that's the angle here. It's for him to kind of get that monkey off his back, and not just get the monkey off his back, but if he can get a win, like we were talking about earlier on in the show, Simon, I think then he's just one win away from potentially being say, hey, I've done enough now. I deserve a title shot. Now, whether that's with Shogun, whether that's with perhaps a Glover Teixeira, or perhaps even Gustafsson, like I said, I'm really not sure in 2017 that him and Gustafsson are going to fight each other unless it's perhaps for a title. Right, I'm just really not sure. They may they may fight. I'm not sure, but I doubt it. Because the relationship's a lot stronger than it was the last time they fought. But Corey Anderson, he's a game opponent. This is a massive opportunity for him to fight in a main event, and but I think my gut and my head tell me that everything's being lined up for a Jimi Manuwa win here. I think over the course of 5 rounds, at one stage or another, he's got his left hook or his right hook or a right uppercut or something is going to find the target, and that target is going to be Corey Anderson's chin, and I think he's going to knock him out.
I think that is a distinct possibility as well. You look at Corey Anderson. Corey Anderson is someone who gradually breaks you down. He wears on you. And the finishes that he's had in the UFC have been late. They've been in the 3rd round. He hasn't knocked out someone early since he beat Matt Van Buren in the TUF finale. And Matt Van Buren was, I think, pretty undersized in that fight. So it's going to be a situation where Anderson is going to look to control Manuwa early on. He's going to look to stifle him and try and sap the strength and draw out the power early, and then look to work on him towards the end of the round. The fact that it's 5 rounds, I think, may play to Jimi Manuwa's benefit, because that's 5 restarts, right? Even if he gets taken down and held down for the entirety of a round, he's got 5 restarts, and at the start of each round, he's in his wheelhouse. And as you say, he is behind Anthony Rumble Johnson, probably the most destructive striker in that UFC light heavyweight division. And to me, we've seen glimpses of it in past fights, but against OSP, it looked to me like he'd finally pieced it all together. We had the takedown defense absolutely on point. There was no problem there. The striking was patient. He wasn't throwing knockout shots with every single punch. He was throwing set-up stuff as well. And he looked like someone ready to make that jump, to really announce himself as a contender. And I think he looks a completely different, more evolved animal than he was when he fought Alex Gustafsson back in, when was it, 2014, March 2014. So, it might only have been 4 fights ago, but I think we've seen a huge quantum leap in Jimi Manuwa's progression. And the one thing that is always there, however, is that fight-ending knockout power. And if he can finish the night with a bang, then he's going to send all of those London fight fans home happy. That is UFC Fight Night 107, Manuwa versus Anderson. That takes place on Saturday night, March 18th, at the O2 Arena in London. If you are in the UK and in the London area, there are a few bits and pieces going on during fight week. We've got some good guest fighters, Sandhu, who are coming over. We've got Claudio Gadella is coming over. Francis Ngannou is going to be here. Mickey Gall is going to be here. And who am I forgetting? Someone pretty substantial is coming over. Crikey, I've completely blanked. Misha Tate is coming over. There you go. So that's a strong lineup of guest fighters. There's going to be meet and greet and Q&A and all that stuff happening on weigh-in day. Get yourself down to the O2. I believe all of that is free. So get yourself down there for weigh-in day. Check UFC Europe on Twitter for the all the times and all that sort of stuff. Weigh-ins, of course, will follow that at the O2, and the fights, of course, on Saturday night. Sandhu, that wraps up most of what we were going to talk about. Should we do some Q&A before we get out of here?
Let's do it, and let's get right into it. We've got Paul James, who tweets in with a two-parter, and he says, do you think that if Gastelum gets his weight issues sorted, he's good enough to be a two-weight champion? And then the second part of the question is, he's off to the O2 this weekend. It's his very first event. Anything you can recommend doing before the event?
Nando's.
So, yeah, basically,
go to Nando's.
Get yourself a cheeky Nando's at the O2 Arena. So that answers the second part of the question. But Gastelum being a two-weight champion, how about he just becomes a champion in one weight class first, and we figure out what that weight class is, and just take it from there? Let's just pump the brakes on anyone being a two-weight champion. It's only been done a handful of times ever in the 20-plus year history of the UFC. Just because Conor McGregor did it last year, and just because GSP could potentially do it this year, doesn't mean it's going to become a regular occurrence. It's very, very difficult to do it in one weight class. So I don't know, Simon. Do you want to weigh in any more than that?
It is incredibly difficult to do. But Kelvin Gastelum could do this. He could do this. He looks brilliant at middleweight, and he's basically still a kid in fighting terms. You give him another 2-3 years, he's going to be a monster. And if during that time he's able to hone his weight cutting a little bit, he could become. He's got the ability. What he needs to do is just tighten up on some of the aspects of how he manages his body weight. This is coming from a fat guy, so I mean, I wouldn't take this much critique from me, that's for sure. But if he can sort out his weight cutting situation, I see no reason why he can't make 170. And if he can make 170, yes, he can win the world title within the next 5 years. As a middleweight, yeah, he could potentially win the world title in there. It'd be a tougher ask. Can you imagine Kelvin Gastelum against Luke Rockhold as an example? Just from a physical standpoint, Rockhold is a great big guy with a huge reach, likes to use his kicks a lot. Gastelum would have to walk through an awful lot of punishments just to get his hands on him. So from just a sheer size point of view, it's a tougher ask. Ability-wise, no question, he could be a world champion at either of those weight classes. But I do, all joking aside, agree with you. Pick a weight class and go for the world title. And once you've got that world title, defend it. It's becoming a novelty. It shouldn't be a novelty. If you're a world champion, you shouldn't be immediately looking to jump weight classes. You shouldn't be immediately looking for a money fight. You should be immediately looking to clear out your division, is what you should be doing. You should be doing a Demetrius Johnson. You should be saying, who's next? You tell me who's next. I'll be creosoting my fence, or looking after the family, or going down the gym. You ring me and tell me who the next best guy is, and I'll beat him too. That's what Demetrius Johnson does. That's what everybody should do, because championships need to matter again. Make the UFC great again. Here ends the political broadcast from the Brit Pack Party. Next question.
The People's Hero tweets in and says, when it's all said and done, what is Brad Pickett's legacy? We spoke about this a little bit earlier on. We were talking about his fight, Simon. And for me, he's going to be remembered as a UK fan favourite. Someone that will always, like you said, Simon, say yes when the call comes in. Somebody's got a win over Demetrius Johnson, which not too many people can lay to claim on that. And, fingers crossed if all goes well for him on Saturday night, at least he can say he goes out on a win. That remains to be seen. But from a personal point of view, from a media member's point of view, he's been a great interview, always has got time for you. He's always been open and never skirted around any issues or questions. He kind of just tells it like it is. He's a common man, Simon. He's almost like the Dusty Rhodes in a way of the UK MMA scene. He's a common man. He's one of the people. He's never kind of done the whole Mayweather thing where he's kind of flashing jewelry or the bling or the cars or the fancy suits. You know, he's a working class fighter, and he's one of the people, the working class people here in the UK. That's how I think his legacy will be said and done when it's all said and done.
Yeah, you're dead right. He doesn't walk around in suits. This is a man who used to, before the Reebok deal came in, used to walk to the octagon in a vest and braces and wearing a Trilby hat. Thankfully, he still is able to wear his Trilby hat, which is a tribute to his grandfather, who used to be a bare knuckle boxer. But the two things that I will always remember about Brad, long after his fight career finished. Number one, he's got, and people in America will not get this. They will disagree with this. They will tell me that this is an English thing and it makes no sense. But the fact that he walks out to Chaz and Dave for me is brilliant. I love Chaz and Dave. It is the most quintessentially London soundtrack. As a kid growing up, I remember Chaz and Dave. And the fact that he walks out to Chaz and Dave, he walks out to Gertrude by Chaz and Dave, which is just classic. That will always stick with me. And the other thing is, it was in Nottingham. He fought Yves Jabouet in Nottingham. I was cage side for that fight, and it was the fight where he really did deliver as advertised. He's Brad One Punch Pickett, and he knocked out Yves Jabouet with a flying uppercut. He just leapt in, hit him with an uppercut, and celebrated by doing the Gangnam Style dance. And that was highlight reel material for the next week or so. Absolutely brilliant stuff. And that, for me, if you were saying who is One Punch Pickett, you showed a Chaz and Dave walkout with the vest and the braces, and then you show him knocking out Yves Jabouet with one punch, and then you see him dancing around the octagon like an idiot. Because he's just a fun-loving guy who's just, what do I do? I know, I'll do Gangnam Style. And that's what he did. And for me, that's Brad Pickett. He fights like I'd like to think most of us would like to try and fight if we ever got in there and had a go. He just puts his balls on the line every time. Sometimes he wins, sometimes he loses, but you know you're going to get some action when he gets in there. Legend.
Simba Moshi tweets in and says, if Makwan Amirkhani performs as well as he has been performing, who do you match him up against next? And Simon, we spoke about this earlier on in the show. It's a pick 'em fight. It really is. But considering his age is 28, he's got double-digit number of fights on his pro record now. If Makwan can get the win over Arnold Allen, and it's a big if because it's going to be a very evenly contested fight, I really want to see him matched up against a ranked opponent, somebody in the top 15. And I'm talking someone maybe between 10 and 15. Looking at the rankings right now, you've got Brian Ortega, Dennis Bermudez, Darren Elkins, the Superboy, Duho Choi, Renan Barao, Misard Bektik. Someone of that ilk, somebody of that caliber. That's who I would like to see Makwan go up against next if he wins. Am I right in saying that? Is that what your thoughts are as well?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe he needs one more before you throw him to one of those guys. Just you reeling off those names there, they are some serious killers. And you look at 15, Masad Bektik is ranked 15th in that featherweight division. And Masad Bektik, granted he got beat by Darren Elkins, but he's a killer. He is an absolute killer. And I think a jump to that level is a significant jump. That's not to say he's not capable of achieving it, but it's a significant jump nonetheless, which makes me wonder if maybe one more fight just outside that featherweight top 15 might not be a terrible idea, and then stick him in there. I quite like the idea of him facing Dennis Bermudez. I don't know why. I just think stylistically, I think that might be interesting. Brian Ortega, I think the styles might mesh quite nicely. Or even Darren Elkins. Darren Elkins is someone who likes to grind on opponents and work on the mat. And I think from a grappling perspective, where Makwan is at his best is when he's wrestling and he's got the fight on the mat. That would be a really interesting fight against a guy who does not get beat easily. So That would be a serious test. If you're Darren Elkins, you're looking further up the list than that, of course. But yeah, it's a tricky one. And of course, he's got the not inconsiderable job of dealing with Arnold Almighty Allen first, who I guess if he wins, you could flip the question to him. I mean, I think both guys maybe need one more win just outside that featherweight top 15 before you throw him to the wolves. But that's just me. I think maybe one more.
Fair play. Well, I mean, the main thing I want to see McQuan do, regardless of whether he wins or loses on Saturday night, I just want to see him fight more consistently. Yeah. He's been out for a year. I've got a kind of a weird fantasy of him returning to Stockholm. I don't know if he can turn around in that short amount of time and fight on that Stockholm card in May, but just to return to his old stomping ground, a city he must know really well by this stage, having spent so many years at the All Stars gym. That would be an interesting angle going into that particular card, but let's get London out of the way first and see how things pan out, both for Allen and for Makwani. The final question comes in from Navi, who says, what is next for Edson Barboza? So Edson Barboza, coming into this past weekend's card in Fortaleza, was ranked at number 5. Ahead of him is Rafael dos Anjos, who I believe sooner or later will be removed from these rankings and shifted over to the welterweight ranking, as he's going to be moving weight classes. So I think automatically you're going to see Edson Barboza jump up at least one position to number 4. We spoke about it a little bit earlier on, Simon. You got the potential of the Tony Ferguson fight, potentially, if Khabib doesn't work out for Tony, or if Nate Diaz doesn't work out for Tony. But I just look at a couple of spots behind Edson. You've got Michael Chiesa, who's looking for a fight, and again, I think the main thing Edson can do for the remainder of 2017 is just to be consistent, remain active, stay in the spotlight, don't disappear. And who knows, sometimes things can happen where you might be called upon to fill in a major spot. But I've got a dirty feeling that he may be, at least for the short term, he might be getting the Damian Maia, Yoel Romero treatment. Hopefully it's not for too long. Remember, the WME IMG, they're just trying to get through the next couple of quarters because they've got this massive financial target to hit. So they're changing the rules a little bit in terms of how they matchmake, what kind of fights they put on. Hopefully, it's a short-term strategy. Long-term, they'll hopefully revert back to what we all want to see is fights based on meritocracy and ranking and so forth.
Yeah. Well, there's options here, right? And if you're looking purely at rankings, it's tricky. You mentioned Chiesa. Yeah, Chiesa is a fight that could be made. I sometimes look at it from a stylistic point of view as well. I would rather see Chiesa fight Khabib. I've got to be honest. I think that fight I think makes a lot of sense. If Khabib isn't going to fight Tony Ferguson, that is. If they're going to penalise Khabib and say you're going to have to move down the ladder and prove you can make weight again before you fight for gold, then that's the fight I would make for him. I think Michael Johnson is a possibility. Michael Johnson has fought Edson Barboza in the past and beaten him by decision. But that was 2 years ago in Porto Alegre at UFC Fight Night, Bigfoot versus Mir. That would be an all-striking matchup. I think that would be an interesting fight to watch again. And we know he lost to Ferguson. Sandwiching those two losses, by the way, the loss to Ferguson and the loss to Johnson, was a win against Paul Felder. And if you really have nothing else to do with him, and you can't find another opponent, and you just want to put on an absolute banger of a fight, put Paul Felder back in there with him again. That was an outstanding match. And Felder will give anybody a fight. That was a fight of the night winner back in July 2015. Has no ranking ramifications at all. If you're just looking to sort of keep him active while treading water in the rankings, why not? Give him Paul Felder again. I've got no qualms about that. No one's going to get upset by that matchup because it's a fight that you know is going to deliver fireworks on Fight Night. So there's a few options there, but Ferguson would be my first one. But I would also prefer to see Ferguson face Nate Diaz. I don't think Nate Diaz would ever fight Edson Barboza, but I wouldn't mind to see that either. So, yeah.
What's definitely interesting is this lightweight division. There's lots at play for a lot of fighters in that top 5, top 6, and it's going to be interesting to see how things play out, especially in the next couple of months whether Khabib comes back before Ramadan, whether he waits, if Tony Ferguson accepts a fight, because he just come off what was probably, his best camp. He looked in absolute fantastic condition. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting times. And Edson Barboza, of course, coming off a flashy flying knee knockout. That was the last question. Short and sweet this week. But as always, if you want to shoot your questions over for the show, feel free to do so at any time throughout the week. The handle you want is at the BritPack MMA. That will make sure that question reaches us. I'll then monitor it, give it a like so that it'll be asked on the show. And that is the end of this week's Q&A, Simon.
Great stuff. Couple for you, Mr. Sandhu. True or false? Floyd Mayweather has called out Conor McGregor to fight in June. In June. True or false, that fight happens in June?
Well, you're putting me on the spot now, Simon.
I am.
You know what? I'm going to go out there. I'm going to be ballsy. And I'm going to say it's true for two different reasons. Number one, we know that the UFC, like I mentioned before, have got this massive financial target to try and hit some financial payouts and bonuses and what have you. And let's face it, the UFC pay-per-view so far in 2017 haven't exactly been setting the world on fire. You know what would? A Mayweather-McGregor boxing match where the UFC's got a cut of that pay-per-view. Even if it's a small cut, it'll be a nice little payday for them. And apparently, the rumor mill is that the T-Mobile Arena has been reserved for June 20th. I believe that's the date in June. So, for a potential McGregor-Mayweather fight. Listen, I'm just going to say yes, because I hope it happens, because the sooner it happens, the better, then we can just move on with the whole damn toe. And also, if we know it's going to happen, at least we can just enjoy it for what it is. And I don't want to have a 6-month, 9-month build-up. If it's going to happen, let's get it done in the next couple of months, and then we can move on with our lives.
Yeah, I think Floyd is so smart. He really is. The fight, it feels like it's getting closer to happening, doesn't it? It feels like it's getting closer from being a completely wild, ridiculous story. It now feels like this incredible story might actually come to fruition. But asking for June is so smart. Why? Because it gives McGregor very little time to get ready for his first ever professional boxing match against the greatest, well, certainly the greatest boxer of his generation. So, amazing. I think September's more likely, but I'm not ruling anything out at this stage. This is a story that hopefully we'll get to a conclusion eventually, whether it be June, whether it be September. You said it was going to happen in June. I'm going to say it's not going to happen in June, but it's going to happen in September. And that is the first time I've ever gone on record as saying the fight is going to happen. I've said consistently this fight is not going to happen. I think it probably is going to happen now. It's worth too much to too many people for it to not happen at this point.
It's finally got the Simon Head seal of approval. It's going to happen.
Oh no, I don't approve of it. Don't let this confuse you. I think this fight should not be sanctioned, right? I'm just putting it. Why would a guy with no professional boxing experience? How can any guy with no professional boxing experience be sanctioned to fight a world champion boxer? But this isn't a world champion boxer.
How can a professional wrestler with no mixed martial arts experience fight in the UFC? This is the world that we live in, Simon.
But I know, but it's also craziness. Yes. It is different though. The professional wrestler was an NCAA champion.
Was CM Punk an NCAA champion?
No, but CM Punk CM Punk fought a guy of a suitable level of experience. Whereas Conor McGregor is stepping into boxing as a professional against a man with a 49-0 record.
What if, Simon? What if?
This is why they're going to make a shitload of money, Sandy, because we're asking questions like, what if?
Yeah. What if that left hook that has made Conor McGregor millions, according to his Instagram post?
This is professional prize fighting, and that is why people want to watch, because you never know.
And we're going to lap it up. We're going to lap it up all the way until Fight Night.
Of course I will. I love it. I'm all about the spectacle as well, and that will be some spectacle. As a sporting contest, I hope it exceeds my expectations, but my expectations are quite low. So we will see what happens. You think it's going to happen? I think it's going to happen. What I can guarantee is going to happen is episode number 32 of the Brit Pack, because that is coming for you next week, and we will look back at UFC Fight Night London as we recap the best and worst of the action from the outer arena. Will Jimi Manuwa get that big win in the main event against Corey Overtime Anderson? Which of the featherweight prospects will progress? Will it be Arnold Allen or Makwan Amirkhani? And how many of those Brits that are packing the fight card are going to be celebrating in London on Saturday night? We will be back with all that and a lot more on next week's show. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Acast. You can go to the website, thebritpackmma.com. You can follow Sandhu at Sandhu MMA. You can follow me at Simon Head, and you can follow the show at the Britpack MMA. That is where you send your questions. Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. We will speak to you in a week's time. Take care and enjoy the fights.